Welcome to Big Daddy's Story Time. We're reading Winnie the Pooh, Franken Pooh. It was the sort of crisp and sparkling autumn afternoon in the 100-acre wood that filled the heart of a very small animal with a story bursting to be told and desperate to be listened to. And at Piglet's house, where he had just finished hosting a small tea for his friends Rabbit, Pooh, Tigger, and Gopher, Piglet announced quietly that telling a story was just what he was going to do. Tigger leaped out of the overstuffed armchair he was sharing with Rabbit and Gopher to where Piglet was standing nervously on the hearth. Is it a ghost story full o' spookables and horrible creatures and things that go shopping in the night? Or, Tigger gasped as he clenched himself in a delightful tingle of terror, is it about a mad scientist type? Oh no, protested Piglet. Not mad at all. Quite happy and cheerful, really. Then, clearing his throat carefully, he began the story. Once upon a time. Tigger listened for a moment, then interrupted. Say, it's the broad daylight. Even a not so scary story has to happen at night, you know. The picture in Piglet's head of a beautiful castle on a bright summer's day suddenly grew very dark. Oh dear, he murmured to himself. And, continued Tigger, a nice thunderstorm wouldn't hurt either. Piglet's ears drooped as his imagination included a fierce thunderstorm, crashing and rattling around the castle in his story. But Piglet wasn't ready to give up. He had a story to tell, and he was going to tell it his way, if no one minded very much. Piglet thought about what glorious snacks he could whip up in a spotlessly neat and busily busting laboratory if he were a pleasant and very cheerful scientist. He wasn't a bit mad. He wasn't even slightly annoyed. Not even at Tigger. Piglet said as he imagined the scientist holding a dripping sandwich. Peanut butter and jelly, my favorite, and so very good for you, too. Gasped Tigger, suddenly interrupted Piglet's thoughts. What is it? Piglet demanded. What is it? If you're going to tell a story about a scientist, Tigger's voice continued, he ought to at least be doing something terrible like creating a boogie monster. A monster? Piglet answered in a tiny, not very hopeful that the story was going to go his way sort of voice. Yeah, responded the irrepressible Tigger. The monster Frankenpooh. The scientist looked at Frankenpooh with mixed feelings. Pooh, a monster? Yeah, Tigger continued. That's absolutely perfect. Only he ought to be bigger than that. At once, Frankenpooh grew bigger and bigger and bigger until the very small scientist felt very small indeed. Oh, bother, sighed Frankenpooh as he bumped his head on the top of the page. Now that's what I call a monster, hooted Tigger. Ooh! The very small scientist ran around the monster's feet in a frightened flurry of activity, shouting, "Oh, help me! Oh, save me! This is very terrifying!" Tigger chuckled, delighted. The monster Frankenpooh, after much thinking, and scratching of oversized ears, reached a monstrous conclusion. I want honey, he announced in a voice so loud he surprised himself, and he went looking for a not so small smackerel of something sweet to eat. Honey, he announced again, just because he liked the sound of it. And the monster Frankenpooh, announced Tigger, went looking high and low for whatever it is monster Frankenpoohs look for. Honey, boomed Frankenpooh, as if to remind him. And the villagers skedaddled for life and lumber, continued Tigger, trembling in their socks, clinging to the edge of your seats. But there's no stopping the gargantual, monstrous monstrosity. And everybody was up to their necks in arms, added Tigger dramatically, because they knew who it was that was responsible for the terriblest monster that was terrifying them. Oh dear, moaned the scientist as he found himself surrounded by the full of wrath villagers. Help! Squeaked the scientist. Stop the story, please! It's an accident. I didn't mean to do it. I just wanted to be a nice, not so scary story. Piglet opened his eyes to discover himself back on the hearth of his own very fireplace, surrounded by his good friends, Tigger, Rabbit, and Gopher. But, Piglet, soothed Tigger, it was nothing to get so upset about. It was just a it was a silly story, whistled Gopher. Of course, Piglet, added Rabbit gently. This was no monster, and no one's angry at you. Piglet looked around in great relief. No? He asked in a very small voice. No, his friends all assured him in one voice. After his friends had settled Piglet in his favorite armchair and given him a cup of his favorite hot chocolate, Rabbit put his arm comfortingly around Piglet's very small shoulder. You really should learn the difference between what's real and what isn't, Rabbit told him gently. Shouldn't he, Pooh? Yes, Piglet, responded the very large and Franken-looking bear. You really should, and so should I. Then he emitted quite the largest Pooh Bear sort of sigh they had ever heard. Oh, bother! And Pooh did eventually get the story straightened out in his head full of fluff and returned to the convenient size proper, to the amounts of honey required to feed an always hungry bear. What have we learned today, my friends? We have learned the joy of sharing a story with friends. Also, we learned from Piglet to be courageous, even when our friend becomes Frankenpooh. Be sure to like, favorite, and subscribe. Stay tuned for more Big Daddy Storytime. God bless.